Welcome back to the Thought Bubble podcast. My name is Laura Swanson, and I have my bachelor's and master's degree in social work. I currently work as a therapist in outpatient mental health in New York City. Today, we are going to talk about engagement in social work practice, as well as intake, and how we can get our clients to stay in treatment. Now, intake and engagement is the first tenet of the plan change process. Today, we're going to be focusing only on that first part and really dissecting the ins and outs of what it looks like to have a solid intake and an engagement process with your client. This is the first podcast in a series all about the plan change process and what that looks like in practice. Now, something that is very important in social work, no matter what area you practice, is getting our clients to show up and be consistent. And that can be very hard. I think a little disclaimer as well. A lot of what we're talking about now is outside of the realm of the pandemic, right? So during this time, you want to take into account the other stressors and difficulties that are coming up for clients. I do think a lack of engagement right now is because of really big macro stressors that are happening. So not just the pandemic, but continued protests, high media, high profile police brutality cases, changes in terms of social justice and advocacy and all of those things. So take those into consideration when you look at clients and their engagement. And another thing is, I think a lot of the times we focus on the negatives, right? We focus on, oh my gosh, this person is not showing up, I'm going to have to discharge them. With every client, whether or not they're showing up, it's important to remember the strengths. You know, what have they been doing really well at? What are they amazing at? What makes them a great client? Forgetting the fact that maybe they're having some difficulty being consistent in treatment. Like I said earlier, I am a therapist. I have my bachelor's and master's in social work. So I think some of the examples I'm giving is in terms of my current practice, which is as a psychotherapist. So if I say something like a therapy session or something like that, you can take that and use it in terms of a client meeting as a social worker or whatever that looks like for you. So at first we have the intake session, and the intake session really, I believe, sets the tone for treatment. Continuing forward, obviously you can fix things and change things after the intake session, but it's really a time of first impressions and how that client is going to perceive you. So at the very first session, something that is very important is just to have, those basic social work skills. Be kind, be compassionate, have empathy, and be welcoming. If when you meet them, greet them with a smile, say, hello, it's great to meet you, introduce yourself. If you're able to, give a tour of the agency that you're working at, show them where the bathrooms are, offer them some water, some tea, a snack if you can. Really make them feel welcome and make them feel comfortable. Then, once you're in your office, giving them a good idea of who you are, what you do, and what today is going to look like. So a lot of the times when I'm meeting a client for the very first time, usually I conduct always I conduct a biopsychosocial assessment at the intake session for outpatient mental health treatment. So I explain to them some of the things that we'll be going over. So I kind of say something like, all right, so today we're going to do something. I'm going to ask you probably 10 million questions. And we're going to go over, why you're interested in starting therapy, maybe some things that come up for you, maybe some concerns that you have. We're also going to talk about your history, your physical health, what it was like growing up, all these different things. And then I ask them if they have any questions for me. And I'm also sure to let them know that if we ever talk about something that they're not comfortable with, or maybe they don't want to get into details to, they can just say, I'm not sure, or I don't really want to talk about that, and then we won't pursue that topic anymore. I think it's something that's really important to know is it's an intake session. Obviously we want to get as much information as we can. We want to have a comprehensive evaluation. But, when we're talking about things like trauma or maybe some incidences that made them feel some type of way, or we're talking about substance use, or we're talking about any of this, you're a stranger. The client is meeting you for the very first time, and it's incredibly hard to open up about your whole entire life, like an open book to someone you just met, even if they were welcoming, even if they did show you where the bathrooms were and offer you a bottle of water. It's important to keep that perspective. Sure, we want them to feel comfortable and to tell us their deepest, darkest secrets and the deepest difficulties of their life, but at the end of the day, they don't have to. Clients also have rights, and if they don't feel comfortable talking about something, or they don't want to tell you about their substance use history or anything like that, they don't have to. So don't pressure it and move on. I think a huge part of this too that kind of goes along with basic social work skills that we'll talk about later as well is just your vibe. I don't love to use the word vibe or energy or anything, but I think that is a huge part of that connection, right? Making sure that you do put off this welcoming, empathetic vibe, I think is very important. Because a lot of the times if you've had a long day and you're kind of just like, oh, hi, I'm Laura. Nice to meet you. Yep. Okay. Let's go to my office. It's right here. I'm gonna ask you some questions. So what's your birthday? What was your childhood? Like, oh, heck no. That is not how you form a solid therapeutic relationship. And like I said earlier, first impressions matter. And that's what is going to keep the client coming back. The second session and the third session and the fourth session is when you have that solid relationship. And that starts immediately building as soon as you say hello and introduce yourself. Like I said earlier as well, it's hard to talk to a stranger. So make sure that you tell your client that, as you're giving that disclaimer and you're saying, if you're not comfortable talking about anything, you don't have to, just let me know. And let them know that you get it, that you're just like, yeah, if I was in your position, I wouldn't want to tell a stranger any of that stuff. So I don't expect you to either, and that's okay. If you need to, and usually what I do with kids and teens anyways, and sometimes with adults, depending, is I spend the first couple of sessions after that not really doing therapeutic work. I guess it would still qualify as therapeutic work, but it's more about building that relationship and building that trust and rapport. So especially with kids, and teenagers, you always kind of start off with play therapy, right? And building that relationship, making them feel comfortable around you. If it is with an adult, you can always say, if you are not ready to talk about this kind of stuff next week, that's okay. It can kind of just be a get to know me session. We can just have a conversation, get to know each other a little better so you feel more comfortable here. So I think those are really the underlying basics of what a solid intake session looks like. And it's important to remember too that engagement happens throughout the entire therapeutic relationship. I've had periods with my clients where at first they're extremely engaged, they're very consistent in treatment, and then a few months it's just like no show. And I'm like, okay, what the heck is going on? And that's important to remember as well, is you are not the only person involved in your client's life, and a lot of the times they're also involved with other providers. I do feel like a lot of the people that we work with are just overwhelmed with the system, honestly, and with being involved in this support group and individual therapy and family therapy and maybe child protection, or maybe they're going to substance use treatment, or they have to care for this family member, or they have their job to go to as well, and it's just 10 million things piled on at once. And so we also need to understand expectations, right? And understand that we are working with human beings, and a lot of these human beings are experiencing very overwhelming life situations, which is why they need therapy or social work assistance in the first place. So always keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. Keep it real and just be a human, because these people are struggling and they need support, which is why they're seeking these services. Notice the client's body language. I've done that a couple of times, and a client will say one thing, right? They'll be like, oh, I'm good. But it's just like the hesitation in their voice or the way they look away. I ask them, are you sure? Are you sure? And then they just really spill it all after I ask them. The first time I'm just like, are you sure? And they're just like, yeah. And I'm like, really? And they're like, no, I'm not okay. So it's about you as a social worker and a therapist using those skills. We understand human behavior, and part of human behavior is body language, normal language, tone of voice, all of those different things. So make sure that you're observant about that too, not just the content of what they're saying, but how they're saying it, how they're portraying themselves as well. In session to build engagement, you can also mirror their body language. I do that with all my clients, but especially with teenagers, which my bread and butter is working with kids and teens, and it's my absolute love to do. But it always is. I'm only 22 years old, okay? I'll be 23 in September. But even, I consider myself pretty young still, right? But even with teenagers, it's just like, man, I still feel so old. I've never been into slang or trends or anything, even when I was a teenager. But now I feel even more out of place and like an old person with teens that I work with now. So I really think, becoming familiar, honestly, with slang and with what they're saying and with mirroring body language and how they talk and how they say things will also help them feel more comfortable. And I say that with all clients too, obviously, not just clients, not just teens, everybody. Make them feel comfortable. If they say something, mirror that language back, mirror that body language as well. Something important to talk about is mandated clients, because I do think that is a big part of social work and a big part of therapy. Is sometimes clients are mandated to receive services or to go to treatment, whatever that looks like. And I'm going to give an example here of a client that I'm working with, obviously within the guidelines of HIPAA. But this person has been diagnosed with a personality disorder and is essentially receiving outpatient mental health treatment in order to basically get a therapist to sign off on the fact that they don't want to work right now or they can't. So kind of using therapy and me as the therapist to sign off on yeah, they're unable to work. Yeah, they have this disability. Their mental health is infringing on their ability to work at this time. This person is very high risk for homicide and suicide and a whole bunch of other things. So a very, very high risk individual that I really have to stay in tune with, right, and in touch with. And at our first session, right out at the offset, they said to me, I don't really want to talk to you. I really just want to make sure I don't have to work, and so I used that. And the majority of our intake session was not really at all gathering any kind of background information. It wasn't really doing anything of a biopsychosocial assessment. I got a few things answered, but not entirely, because I met them where they are. Where they were at that time was that they had a lot of anger, they had a lot of frustration at the system, at the world, at people, at service workers, for good reason, honestly. And I think that's the key thing to remember, is a lot of people, a lot of mandated clients, their feelings are just as valid than clients that are not mandated. If they're angry at the system, they probably have a good reason to be angry at the system. And part of building that therapeutic relationship, especially with clients that are mandated for services, is to join the resistance, right? And by that I mean go alongside them and be like, yeah, that's crap. Wow, they treated you bad. You did not deserve that. The system is broken. You're absolutely right. Your frustration, that's valid. No wonder you're angry. No wonder you're experiencing this. That makes sense. I mean, look at what they put you through. And particularly with working with mandated clients, joining the resistance, I feel, is very powerful for them, because I think a lot of the times clients who are mandated have been in and out of services, in and out of therapy, in and out of treatment, and they're kind of just used to people telling them what to do, telling them what requirements to meet, checking off boxes, and if I'm being real, they slip through the cracks, right? Because they're still mandated to receive services. And so clearly somewhere along the lines, the system failed, which it often does. Which I think, honestly, that's a talk for another day, is what exactly was the system built for? Is the system actually doing its job and keeping people where they are? Blah, blah, blah. But that's a podcast for another day. But I think a lot of the times when you join the resistance with clients, for the first time in a very long time, if ever, clients feel validated. They feel like they can trust you. They finally feel heard. They don't feel like it's just another thing to check off boxes. For once, they're kind of like, absolutely. Some clients may even be taken aback, because I think for a long time, some of them have, they've had workers argue with them or been like, no, you just got to do this and this and this. And so when you come alongside them and agree with them and validate their experience and tell them, yeah, that sucks, they might even be taken aback by like, what? Like, they're not used to that. And so I definitely think joining the resistance is very powerful, particularly with mandated clients. Now, with any clients, any people that you work with, it's important to meet them where they are, wherever they are. And I say this for everything and everyone. If they don't want to meet every single week, don't meet them every single week. Try bi-weekly. And maybe with time, they'll agree to weekly sessions, right? Or meeting with you once a week. But if at first they're just like, nah, I'm not going to do that, then don't. You don't have to push it. Later we'll talk a little bit about motivational interviewing that you can use as well, but meet them where they are. I've had a lot of clients who have a history of substance use and are still using substances. And we talk about it, and I'm just like, okay, is this something you're interested in? Maybe. I never use the word stopping either, because we're about harm reduction over here. So I say, is smoking something that you're interested in doing less of? Do you want to smoke less? What are your thoughts about that? And sometimes they're like, nah, I'm good right now. I don't really feel like that's something that needs to change in my life. I'm like, okay. Sounds good. Great. Perfect. And obviously, if you need to or feel like it would be beneficial, obviously pursue the topic a little more. You can use motivational interviewing techniques to explore their reason, and you always want to get a solid history on those things, right? So have they ever tried stopping before? What did that look like? Have they ever tried harm reduction techniques before? What did that look like for them? Because I do think, particularly in substance use, some people kind of just think you want to tell them to stop smoking or stop drinking or stop doing this and that. But harm reduction is very powerful and it's very effective, and they might not even think of just lowering the amount that they do, right? Or doing it in a healthier way or a less risky way. So always having that conversation and following up on those things. Obviously, you don't want to just, listen to a client and be like, oh yeah, totally, I agree, and then never talk about it ever again. You want to do the work. You want to follow up with them and explore their perspective and explore that particular experience and why they have that perspective, right? So just because they say, no, that's not something I want to work on, we don't just move on from that either. We want to explore that reasoning. We want to explore that experience, right? So I don't want you to think that I'm just saying accept it and move on. Not at all. We want to accept it, explore it, understand it, get a real good idea of what that looks like, and then potentially use some motivational interviewing, gauge the patient's motivation for change, all of that, and then move on from it, and maybe eventually, as you check in and they continue with treatment, usually at my agency, we review treatment plans every 3 months, and so usually when it's time to review treatment plans, we talk about those things again, those bigger things, like substance use and things like that, because we review our goals, we review what they want to work on. And we always ask our clients what they want to work on. Always. We do not just say, okay, well, they're depressed, so their goal is going to be to lower their depression on a scale of 0 to 10. They're currently at a 7. We're going to lower that to 5 in 3 months. If the client doesn't want to work on their depression. Maybe they want to work on their self-esteem instead, or maybe they just want to work on, family conflict because that's a stressor for them. That's okay. That is a-okay, because ultimately those are things that contribute to depression, right? If you have high stress relationships, if you have really low self-esteem, those things contribute to depression anyways. So you always want to make sure it makes sense, right? Your goals and objectives in your treatment plan don't necessarily have to be specific to depression. It could be related things, that relate back to or influence, impacts depression as well. So always keep those things in mind. Yeah, and that's all. Really just person first, client-centered. This is the essence of social work. And it's wonderful because it really empowers clients and it drives self-determination. If we focus on what they want to focus on, they're going to be more effective at it anyways. They're going to reach those goals because it's stuff that they actually want to make progress on. Because then, they'll come to therapy and you kind of push these goals onto them, and it's almost like you're just making them a mandated client and saying, this is what we have to work on. That's not true at all. And ultimately, they are paying you for this service. And so they are, in essence, your boss. And if they want to get something out of treatment, then let them get whatever they want out of treatment. It's ultimately your job as a professional to use your skills, to use your education, to create progress and whatever that looks like for that client. I didn't just go to school for 5 years to do absolutely nothing. Oh, heck no. So always keep those things in mind. I think at the end of the day, it's important to be kind, be supportive, be empathetic, and to validate their experience and their feelings. Especially as you continue to build engagement, to build rapport, and during the intake session. Absolutely during the intake session. There have been clients. It can be hard though. It can be very hard because particularly, I don't know if this is the same in your setting that you work, but at my agency, the process is difficult because, we have to be on the computer and fill out this form and everything that has the biopsychosocial assessment there. And so at the beginning, I let my client know, just so you know, I do have to use the computer today. In future sessions, I won't be using the computer and I won't be taking notes. You'll have my absolute full attention. If you're able to, have the client sit right next to you so they can see what you're typing. Let them, obviously have input, make sure that you phrase things correctly. If they want to add anything or change anything. And always be sure that you still make it a comfortable process and not a experience that's too clinical, right? Because I don't know, it's just like that feeling I get when I go to the doctors and they're just like, okay, do you do this? Okay, and they just check the boxes on their computer, and it's very impersonal. Impersonal? I think that's the word I want. But we're social workers. That is not what we do. We make people feel loved and supported, no matter what that looks like. And so part of doing that is making sure that they're comfortable in the intake session, making sure, ultimately it's their story, it's their information. And if they want to sit right next to you and read exactly what you're typing, that is their prerogative. And invite them to do that. Invite them to have that control over the session and let them know exactly what that looks like. And during the session, like I was saying, validate their experience and their feelings. They're talking about some intense stuff a lot of the times. Maybe, for the first time ever, I had a client disclose that she was sexually abused. I was the first person she told. And obviously, we had a lot of information to get through. We had a lot of questions to ask. It was a big assessment. It's a lot of details to get, right? But if I hadn't taken those moments to first express my gratitude to her and her strength and her resilience and being able to open up and share that experience with me and how strong she was to do that, using empowerment, using strengths-based language is so important, especially in dealing with difficult topics. Letting them know how much progress they've made already and the fact that they are seeking treatment and support and mental health care. Letting them know that's painful. What you went through, that's traumatic, that's hurtful. and validating, labeling what those feelings are, and that experience was difficult, because a lot of the people that we see have had their experiences minimized or overlooked. So even taking those few moments during the intake session, even when you have 10 million questions to ask, let them know that you care. Let them know that their experience was difficult, that their feelings are valid, and that in agreeing to treatment and in starting the therapy process anyways, that shows courage, that shows strength, and how important that is for them. So never forget that at all. And like I said earlier, using basic social work skills, active listening. This is such a basic thing to do, and yet people lack. And I'm not sure why it's so hard, but pay attention to your body language, make eye contact, do all of those things, and at the end of the day, use culturally competent care. I know cultural competence is not really the term now, it's cultural humility, but being aware as well. I've had clients, I have made eye contact with a couple of clients, and one of them, they were a teenager, and they were just like, I'm just not comfortable making eye contact with people, so sorry about that. And it's important that you acknowledge that and be like, that's okay, you don't have to make eye contact with me. You can look at the floor if you want, that's fine. And just normalizing that experience for them too. Just because we like to make eye contact, or we like to sit with more open and vulnerable body language, that does not mean they have to do that. Heck no. Some people are not comfortable with that, and that's okay. So normalize that as well, and also if they let you know that they maybe aren't comfortable with something, or they don't make eye contact, or they don't do this because of a cultural reason, thank them for telling you that. Because not only were they open and honest with you, but they just enhanced your practice, and that's going to be helpful in sessions coming up in the future. And then lastly, as we were mentioning earlier in the podcast, motivational interviewing. So a lot of the times we can use kind of just basic motivational interviewing skills, in exploring pros and cons and understanding, previous treatment, why they're interested in treatment now, what their goals are, why those are their goals, different things like that. And using MI skills can be very beneficial, especially in intake and engagement, as you're talking about treatment plans, treatment goals, different things like that. And that is basically all. The intake and engagement process really sets the tone for treatment. It really begins and plants the seed for the therapeutic relationship. And I also want to say as well that even if you have maybe an intake session that you feel like went poorly, or that you're not really proud of, that's okay. It's okay. We're going to make mistakes. We are maybe going to have some off days where we're a little tired, we need a little bit more caffeine, or maybe we just, have that bad vibe, that bad energy that day, and that client just doesn't connect with you. That's okay. I think as long as we acknowledge that, it's okay, and we can heal that therapeutic relationship. I do think there are also instances where sometimes you just don't connect with the client, or a client wants to see a different therapist. Don't take offense to that. We're all human, and it's the client's money. They get to choose who their therapist is, who their social worker is, if they have that option. And so allow them that self-determination. The fact that they're there, willing for treatment, you don't want to hinder that by being like, nah, you have to be my client. Work with them. Like I said, work with where they are. And if that means referring them to another therapist, or getting them someone that maybe they identify with a little bit better or connect with, that's okay. It's truly nothing personal at all. Just always staying engaged with them, always listening to them, and knowing that at the end of the day, if you did the best that you could, then that's all right. Then that's okay. Social work is a hard job. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. But I truly think that when we have these basic skills of engagement, and later on in future podcasts as we talk about the plan change process, those are truly the basic tenets of social work. And when we have those foundations and underlying themes present and strong in our work, we can really come through with some really effective evidence-based practice. And that is ultimately the most important thing. We work to support other people. We work to prevent social issues. We work to alleviate stressors, and we work with vulnerable populations. And ultimately, our goal is to work so that one day we will unemploy ourselves. We don't want to have a world in which social workers need to exist. And so when we begin this process of being social workers and in educating ourselves and in practicing our skills and in working with people, we want to do so in an effective way. And that all starts in the intake and engagement phase of the plan change process. Thank you all so much for listening to today's podcast on intake and engagement in social work and therapy. If you relate to anything that we talked about, or you want to share your experience with navigating the plan change process, feel free to share it in the comments on whatever platform you're listening on. Also, check out my Etsy, Teespring, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, Facebook, and YouTube at ThoughtBub. The links will be provided. If you'd like to donate to the Thought Bubble, you can go to my PayPal account provided below. Once again, thank you all so much for listening. I look forward to growing with you all as social workers and therapists and continuing to work in the absolute best field in the world. See you next time.